Open Windows Podcasts. A venture of Hit the Road Cultural Journeys. A journey in time to music and the arts for your enjoyment and enrichment. Presented by Orhan Ahıskal, DMA, solo violinist and former professor of violin and chamber music. Everybody, hi, I am very happy to be here. I'm very excited and very honored. I have a great guest. She's a wonderful musician, a professor. Let me actually quickly introduce. But with that, we were just talking about this. My guest, Barbara Westphal, I was looking at her bios online. Here's how you should approach to information online. It says the American violist, and Barbara says, I am not an American violist. So she's a German violist, and you come from Munich, yeah, Barbara?
Yes, I grew up in the outskirts of Munich.
Okay. But you studied in London and New York, it says.
That's right.
That part is correct.
True.
Okay, let's look at it like that. You took a concert examination with Itzhak Perlman?
Yes.
And Michael Tree from the Guarneri Quartet.
That's right.
These are correct. Okay, where were these? Where did you do these things?
At Yale and at actually Brooklyn College, where at the time Perlman was teaching, long time ago. That was his first teaching.
I see, okay.
Teaching position. And I had to take the train out to Brooklyn every week, and it was an adventure. Terrible school, but I loved the lessons with him.
Train to Brooklyn from Manhattan?
From Manhattan, yeah. It's like 3/4 of an hour. Flatbush Express train. Yeah, it occurred to me soon that this time was a lot of time I could use to do things with and not just sit on the subway. So one of the memories I have from that time was actually how to learn mentally, because I learned Bach Fifth's cello suite on the train, looking at it, making fingerings, understanding the harmonies and the structure and everything. And then some weeks later, when I thought, now I know it by memory, I took my instrument and to see how it would work.
The first time you actually played the piece, yeah?
It was fantastic. This was also in the time, it sounds probably, my Perlman, I studied violin with Perlman, of course. So, but during that time I was already leaning toward the viola, or having projects on the viola just to see, because I was asked to play in a quartet. And that's why I learned the Bach Fifth, because I had always wanted to learn it. So it was one of my first projects on the viola.
That's what I was going to ask. You didn't play the Bach's Fifth Suite on the violin,
no. No.
So both the instrument and the pieces actually were new for
That's
you.
Right. Yes.
Now, talking about your bio, some of the things were not correct in this bio that I found online. It says you've concertized all over the world, but part of it is not true. Like it said, you're an American violist, but you're not. You're a German violist. Okay.
But the story about the bios is funny, because years ago, my then piano trio, when I was still a violinist, went to play in Brazil, and they had asked for, first of all, you have to be prepared that once you get to a place, you might find out the concert has been postponed by a week.
In South America, you mean?
It's sometimes very iffy with the organization. But anyway, they had asked for bios and all the PR material that you usually send to sponsors before you go and play there. And I had sent my bio, and when I looked in the program, when we played, I thought, is this a different person? So they apparently didn't know some of the names of my teachers that I had put in my bio, and thought that they weren't famous enough for the Brazilian public. So they rewrote my bio.
With more famous teachers.
So I had studied with Jascha Heifetz and with Kreisler and with people even dead at the time. It was just very bizarre. But for them, that was important, because people would come to the concert if the bio sounds like she studied with the most important people, that you've ever heard of, kind of thing.
It's a selling point for them then.
It's a selling point, absolutely. They don't really want to know what you actually did.
But
No.
something famous and flashy.
But that was the most interesting case of just what I had sent had nothing to do with what they actually wrote in the
That's a funny
program.
story. So it looks like the tradition continues, and your bios online have information that's not really correct. But it is true. People do want to read so famous, something so big, and all of these superlatives, and that's what attracts audiences. Unfortunately, not the music itself sometimes, but the name.
It's very annoying. I think that's very sad that that's the way it is. But it's just like you have to have reviews, and they need to be full of superlatives, like you said, and then you get hired more often. But anyway, that's part of the part of this profession. A part that doesn't really make me so much at home in it, but it's part of it. So.
Well, with that, I put a little post on social media last week that I said we were going to have a little podcast recording. I tagged some of my violist friends. One of them responded and said, "You played in his first concert in London, and you played the violin." I didn't know that. I didn't know you started as a violinist, you say.
Yes.
And he sent his regards. He says, "I don't know if she will remember me." His name is Julian Shaw.
Julian Shaw.
In London. You played Mozart duets, I understand.
So
because he is a violist, so you played the violin part.
Maybe it was during my time as a student there at the Royal College. That's very possible.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah. Certainly sounds like that. Great. So he says hello.
Okay, well.
He might be listening to it.
Hello, Julian.
Okay, so you were in London. You studied before New York or later?
Yes, before. I was typical young person enamored with the city of London. I just went to London because I wanted to live in London. That was my aim. I didn't care much who to study with. It was just really childish, kind of. So I got a place and I studied with someone who turned out very quickly was no match at all. Didn't work for me.
Okay.
And after 3 months I asked for a change, to have a different teacher, and then I had a couple of wonderful years with Frances Mason, who was then in the London music group. It was a London chair music group, and she played a lot around London and was a wonderful person and perfect teacher for me.
Okay, well, with that, since we got to that point, you've yourself worked as a professor here in Germany since 1989.
That's right.
And you retired last year, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
From Lübeck
Yes.
Musikhochschule.
That's right.
Okay, I was going to ask you this later, but since it came up, there are a lot of young people, young aspiring musicians. What would you recommend? Is it like, okay, I'd like to go to Berlin, I don't care who I study with, and then what happens? What happened to you?
It was definitely a mistake, I would say. However, one that I think I'm very forgiving of, because I understand young people's curiosity and thirst to live in an exciting place like London, New York, Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
Just one reason it was not always easy to get good people to come, talented people to come study in Lübeck, which is also a beautiful town, but it's not
one of those famous cities. Exactly.
And it has other advantages, but so what I would recommend anybody now is obviously to first go, and I have recommended to students of mine when they go after they've studied with me, they go to do a master's with somebody else or something like that, they should always go and play for teachers and listen to their teaching other people and get to know some students of theirs to see if it's a good match for them, because I believe very much that there's no such thing as a perfect teacher for everyone. It's a very personal matter. Exactly,
because we do still the very old-fashioned master and apprentice kind of relationship. That's really important. It's really personal. It's like any kind of relationship.
It's absolutely very personal.
With the wrong electric, it doesn't always work out. Even if the person is the greatest player or greatest teacher, it just doesn't work like that.
It's sometimes even just chemistry. It just somehow. I've noticed that. Even just personal things, this may seem a little strange, but if somebody comes with a very heavy perfume and I think, I'm going to have to smell this every week the person comes to the lesson, it can be very difficult to imagine. And naturally, the talent and the abilities, if I see potential in the person, that's the most important thing, obviously, by far. But even little things like that can play a role sometimes.
It does. I've had similar experiences. I won't go into details, but I agree with you. It is difficult, exactly. Now things have changed a lot in the world. It's easier to travel. For instance, I never had the chance to go and try teachers. If I had a chance to just go there once and I was already a full-time student, then they assigned me a teacher. My first time in England, I was lucky. I actually enjoyed learning with that teacher, Malcolm Layfield. And then I found other people to play to. But in the USA, then I ended up, they gave me some teacher who was not much older than I was, didn't do anything for me. So she was always very complimentary, but I didn't need the compliments. I needed the poking and, fixing things.
Constructive input.
Exactly. Then I actually, after a few months, after I became more acquainted with the system and with people, I asked Gene Drucker, who was of the Emersons, and they were in residence there. So I ended up studying with Gene and later on part-time with Phil together. So it's important. So if they can, they should travel, play for different teachers with whom they get a much better rapport. That's very important, much more important than what school it is.
I think
sometimes. So. Yeah, certainly. We continue with your bio. You are foremost viola soloist and a chamber musician.
That's right.
Your career started with the Delos or Delos? Delos string quartet.
It's the name of a Greek island.
Okay.
And I even went there one day because I wanted to see what it's like. And nobody lives there anymore, but it has beautiful antique relics that you can look at. But anyway, that was the name of the quartet, and I joined. I was not one of the founding members. I joined the quartet. That was actually my initial reason for playing viola, because they were looking for somebody for just a year at first.
Okay.
And after the 1 year, it became 7 years. So, and then by then, I didn't play both violin and viola anymore. I just decided if I wanted to do it well, that I should stick to doing one. So I picked the viola.
So that was the reason that you decided
to
go into. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would say so. And of course, any violist. I've played with orchestra many times, but I think you're never a soloist when you're a violist. You just, I've never played in an orchestra professionally, that's true. And I've mostly played chamber music, and I've quite a few times played with orchestra, but I would not really consider myself a soloist. There are not enough opportunities for anyone.
For anyone right now, I think that's true. Everybody has to. There are very, very few people who could actually make a living just playing solo.
I don't know of anybody, and that includes people like Tabea Zimmermann and Kim Kashkashian and all the very few big names that there are in the viola world.
They all
they teach. They play lots of chamber music. They do a little bit of everything.
You're right. When you mentioned the reason you changed to viola, I wrote a book a few years ago. I don't know if I told you.
I think you did.
And it's of a violist, of a very famous Turkish, from Turkey, the most famous Turkish violist. And when you were in London, he actually was in London already, and he had just started at that time with the English Chamber Orchestra, I believe. I had a podcast with him, but he also started as a violinist. And I think that was common earlier on. Everybody just played the violin. Unfortunately for the viola, it was mostly like who could not do the violin was moved on to the viola most of the time. That has changed, of course. It had to change, but that was silly. But I remember he had two stories why he switched from violin to the viola. One of them is official again. They had a string quartet and somebody had to play the viola, and he basically got the short stick. But the unofficial story was that he had loaned his violin to his girlfriend, and for the summer. At the end of the summer, she did not want the violin returned to him. She preferred the violin to him. So she had taken the violin, so he ended up, playing the viola, kind of unofficially. He was, of course, that was the jokester he was. But now, do you think that people should start from the beginning on the viola rather than the violin and then switch to the viola as kids?
Well, my personal opinion about this is that I think it's wise to start on the violin, and that has very simple reasons. People are smaller, they're not fully grown. Hopefully they should start when they're about 5 something. If you really want to get far, that's the age to start on a stringed instrument, in my opinion. And then you can learn the basic technical technique on the violin, which is so much easier than on the viola. And it sounds so much better. If you, like a former student of mine who is now teaching at a school, a music school, neighborhood music school, I guess you might call that. She's teaching violin and viola, and she has a violin maker friend who puts special bass bars into big violas, big violins that make them sound like violas, and just kind of gadgets like that.
Okay.
But in my opinion, it's really better to have them play violin, have it sound good, and then go and change at a certain point when the body has grown enough to be able to do that. And then I think everything's easier on the viola. Now, people like Tabea, she learned from the very beginning. She learned viola.
Okay.
She never played violin, and of course in German those are called Edelbratschen.
Edelbratschen.
If you never played the violin, but right away the viola. For me, the reason really was that actually in a string quartet, I think it's very nice to be one of a kind. Sorry, because
no offense taken.
I mean, okay, good. Because playing the violin is wonderful, and I actually do it for fun again quite a lot these days. And I play quartets actually on the violin.
Okay.
And I enjoy so much how easy it is. But the point is, for me, the sound is something very, very special. And I think unless you have a special love for that kind of sound, you should also not really play viola. I think there are a lot of violinists who think, oh, it's all the same. You just pick up a viola and it's if I'm a good violinist, I'm also a good violist. I don't think that that's really true. I think there's such a thing as it helps to play the violin first, to learn the technique, and then to switch to the viola. But don't switch to the viola unless you have a special connection with that sound, which it has its beauty and its difficulties. It's in the middle. It's not very loud. When the trumpet player always says, "Am I soft enough?" The viola player always says, "Can you hear me?"
But it's true. It's about your personal voice.
Yes, right.
In our case, it's through the instrument.
Yeah.
But with my wife, it's your voice, your actual voice, and then your personality's voice together. In that way, violinists are sopranos, and there's a lot of egos and that kind of stuff. Like I want to be heard, I want to be the loudest. Sometimes I want to be in the forefront.
Right. It's definitely true that there is. I don't like generalizations, but there among violists there's great friendly connections everywhere, and people don't look for. They want everyone to do well and to have opportunities to help each other. That's certainly one of my experiences with the instrument.
You played with the Delos String Quartet and you won the International String Quartet competition in Colmar, France, this says. Playing string quartet, I know I had my quartet for a few years, not like a quartet career, because that's a four-way relationship and that's very difficult. We didn't even name the group as a quartet because we didn't mean to become a quartet in the traditional sense. Mm-hmm. We didn't mean to play the standard rep. We just had a different goal of playing works that nobody else played, that kind of stuff. And we always collaborated with a fifth wheel, let's call it, with a pianist or cellist, and always played quintets. But so you played in a quartet, that's a very difficult thing. Now you have, since 2009, Bartoli String Quintet.
Right.
Where there's two violas, two violins, two violas, and a cello. How would you compare the two, a string quartet versus a string quintet? Is the dynamics very different because number is 5, or?
In my case, the dynamics are extremely different, but I'm not so sure that has anything to do with quartet versus quintet, but more with the particular people involved in the two groups. And in my quartet, in which I played for 7 years, it's already 12 now with the quintet, but seemed like a long time anyway, like a certain chapter in my life anyway. And we traveled a lot and we played up and down lots of concerts. But the dynamic was very difficult because in the group there were different priorities of how to deal with rehearsals, how do I come to the rehearsal and I still want to try ideas out, or or I'm coming and I already have some kind of a concept, which of course can be changed again, but there were just different concepts of how to go about learning repertoire. And so after 7 years, I realized that it wasn't going to be my home, my musical home for the rest of my life.
You mean the quartet or
The
that
quartet.
particular quartet? Overall, the string?
No, the particular quartet. No,
Okay.
in fact, when they had found somebody new to take my place, I listened to the first concert that they played from the back, and I cried incredibly because I was already missing that music. The quartet music is just
It's wonderful.
incredible. However, then I came back to Europe in '89, and I tried to form another quartet. I had various tries with wonderful people, really great people, but it wasn't right. It just didn't work. So I gave up, and some years later, 2009, 2008 probably, 3 of us, Anke Dill and Gusti Rivinius and I, were in Belgium to play with a French pianist whom we all didn't like, piano quartets. But somehow the 3 of us felt really, really incredibly fantastic together. And we went for a walk and we said, let's form a group. And then Gusti said, I'm already playing quartets with my brothers. I don't want to play quartets. And actually I sort of thought, yeah, I mean, we're not students anymore and we don't live in the same town. And so Gusti said, why not quintets? And so we looked for 2 other people, had a couple of tryouts, but then found what seemed like the right combination of people. And it's actually a very heterogeneous group of 5 people at quite different ages and in different phases of their lives, but we have a perfect relationship. It's the kind of relationship where my first violinist in the quartet said, keep dreaming, you'll never find something like that.
But you found it.
I found it.
Oh, great.
Yes, I found it, absolutely.
Wonderful.
And so now we don't live in the same town, and we just meet before we have concerts, we rehearse, and then we play, and then everybody goes home again. We're good friends, we still eat together, travel together. There's absolutely no tension, there's a great sense of humor all the time, and it's fantastic. So I think it has more to do with the good luck of having found people that happen to be on the same wavelength, because a lot of things we don't need to rehearse that we used to rehearse a lot in the quartet, like play together,
Quartets
play
have
in tune.
yeah, exactly. Intonation with the quartets and hours, days,
Yeah.
weeks, months working on a single piece sometimes.
Right.
We should say that to our listeners. Like you said, we still travel together because there are so many stories of quartet musicians traveling separately for the same concert.
Yeah.
I think it was Amadeus Quartet, perhaps. One of them is taking a train, the other one is going by airplane, the other one is taking the bus.
Right.
And they don't even talk before the concert. They just go on the stage and then play, and maybe they play great. But then after the concert, nobody looks at each other and just leaves.
I'm personally not sure how that could work, but I know several quartets where it is like that. I mean, not is, I guess the 2 I'm thinking of have packed up.
Finished, okay.
Yeah, but it is so intense, it really is so intense. And so to have a relationship where there's not somebody who says, oh, you want it to sound like this, and then it's clear, okay, forget that. People being defensive is a big problem in chamber music, in my opinion, and to have a group in a situation where no one is ever defensive. People's ideas get tried out, and then we make a common decision as to how we're going to play it this time, and maybe we even play it differently the next time. And there's never anyone who tells you how to play something. It's just a wonderful balance.
So quartet or chamber music playing, I guess, but quartet is very specifically so difficult. Like once the piano comes in, it's a very different kind of electric, a different kind of intonation approach, for instance.
Absolutely.
When you're with the strings only, then you can tune the hell out of everything. Once the piano comes in, you really cannot, or you don't have to anyway.
Well, no. I think the piano is also a wonderful cover-up for all kinds of little sins that you simply don't hear.
That's true.
It's just the way I think it really is. So to play piano quartets or even piano quintets or trios is just technically so much easier than to play string music only, quartet, quintet, sextet. Yeah, you have to have unbelievably secure cellist that you can really base your intonation on, and then everybody has to have an ear that's roughly hearing the same. You know, that's another thing. It's just like with rhythm. I don't think you can really buy that with money, or it has nothing to do with how famous somebody is. I remember playing with a very good pianist friend of mine, American pianist, who was so eager to rehearse and always, I mean, much more so than other people in his famous position who just come in and have one rehearsal and play the concert. He was really willing to rehearse, but it didn't do any good because we weren't on the same planet as far as especially rhythm was concerned. And I've learned that that's something that either it works or it doesn't.
Sometimes it does work. This is also something interesting maybe for our non-musician listeners, what really goes on before one goes onto the stage. Stage is the last thing, and sometimes it's easiest because you only have the length of the pieces and you're going to play through and that's going to be done. But before, sometimes it could be months to prepare, and it is not so easy. We had such difficult things with our university things in Turkey. We had a concert coming up on next week, let's say, in a few days' time, and the new administration said, but you didn't ask for permission. Well, we got this concert date a year ago, you know, and we've been rehearsing. They don't understand that there's days, weeks, months of rehearsing goes into chamber music concerts if you're doing this professionally and you want to do a good job, not a wedding kind of stuff. And this we couldn't tell people. They didn't understand. They assumed that we just pick up the instruments and sit down. Oh, this is so nice, let's play. Oh, this was very nice. So we'll see at the concert. It's that kind of impression that's really so wrong. The music, that the printed music is only a clue to what's going to happen.
That's true.
And then all the incredible amount of small details, intonation, rhythm, as you said, nuances, dynamics, and how fast you're going to go, or this is too fast, too slow. It's very good to hear that you found that kind of a combination of people, musicians, with your quintet, because that is always the reason, and people cannot leave their egos outside. I think you have to, even if you have an ego, you have to be able to put it aside before you go into a rehearsal with the chamber music group, quartet, but maybe particularly. Otherwise, you can kill each other inside.
It's true, and of course there are plenty of stories of how quartet members kill each other and scratch each other's eyes out. That's not uncommon, including jokes. You know, somebody visiting a violinist in the insane asylum and asked him about his musical career and what he was doing, and make a long story short, when he says, "Did you play quartets?" Oh, he goes all like he has a fit of, and then you understand why he ended up in the insane asylum.
Okay,
so,
he's in the asylum because of a quartet
that's
career.
Right,
okay,
yes. And but I think the magic word is respect, because I know that in my group everyone has a big ego. Absolutely, I would say so.
Okay,
but there's such respect for each and everyone among each other that's not a factor. That's just, you know, it's when you really respect somebody for how they do something, you take them seriously, and if they suggest something, you don't just brush it off, but you take everything seriously that's being suggested, and then egos don't matter. No, I mean, maybe they're not huge egos, but you understand what I mean.
I do.
Five people who definitely have a lot of self-confidence, but there's never any of this defensive stuff just because there's so much respect, and I think that's really the key to it for me.
I understand, but what I meant, I guess, in that way, that combines that because with the ego, I had thought of, like, I am right because I have such a big ego. I am so good, but there's no insistence that one is right. Everybody could be right, and everybody could be right at the same time also. So
right,
but with the respect, it's balanced. Otherwise, there's no way to balance that kind of ego.
Yes, it's balanced, and that also leads to sometimes different interpretations on different occasions, which is absolutely wonderful to feel like something can happen in the concert that was not rehearsed.
That's the magic of live performance, really, in that way. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's for me. That's my musical heaven.
That's wonderful to hear. You have recorded, let's start with the quintet's recordings. They can find them online or buy them or certainly online. So. What are your recordings that you're really happy about?
Well, the first recording we did was a Bruckner quintet and Zemlinsky 5 pieces, pieces for a string quintet, 2 pieces for string quintet, which were not recorded at that time. And we have made so far recordings with Andreas von Imhoff. It's called AVI label. I don't know if you know it. It's a smaller chamber music label. And then we recorded the 2 Mendelssohn quintets in maybe 3 years ago, something like that. And next March we're going to record the Brahms quintets, the F major and the G major. Those are the 3 that we have done so far. And we're actually still thinking of adding Brett Dean Epitaphs as a piece by the Australian composer Brett Dean.
I am not familiar.
Yeah, he's a fantastic composer. We happen to know him personally, and we've worked with him, and yeah, we're good friends, so we can also call him up and say, hey, what did you how did you mean this? So he was a violist in the Berlin Philharmonic. He quit to be an independent composer. Everybody thought he was crazy to quit a job like that to be an independent composer, but he's really been very successful since, and he's written chamber music and a wonderful viola concerto and operas even, and he's being played at the Met in New York and all the big places. So he's been right to quit the orchestra and be a composer. And this quintet, particularly the Epitaphs, has some reference to the G major Brahms quintet, and so we thought it'd be a nice combination to do that. It's mostly a question of does it fit on the CD.
Lengthwise,
because we definitely want to do the two quintets by Brahms and then maybe add the Dean.
Dean. So his name is
Brett Dean.
Brett Dean. Okay. Yeah. If the piece is not longer than 15-20 minutes, I guess it can fit, but
it's about 20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. So it'll be difficult.
Tight.
Okay.
Yeah. But then we've actually also done another project that was really such a great combination of old and new, which is there are some madrigals for 5 stringed instruments by Gesualdo, which are incredibly fantastic, gorgeous, and completely harmonically so new and unexpected.
Carlo Gesualdo, the Renaissance, the madrigals. Yeah, right. Yeah, okay.
Great if you know them.
Yeah, of course. I love them. Yeah. Incredible music.
Yeah, incredible music. And we actually combined 5 of those. Of course, there are many more, but 5 of those with the Dean. So we would do one piece of Gesualdo madrigal, and then a movement of Dean, and then another Gesualdo. And the idea came from, we played in Rome in the spring, and they had a so-called Gesualdi project. And so we tried it, and it was really, it was an amazing experience to have this back and forth from very new to extremely old.
Well, Gesualdo obviously wrote these things as vocal music, and you're playing with the strings.
Yeah.
And Dean's pieces can, of course, if he is aware of this combination, that his music existed already, or he wrote that for that purpose?
No, his music already existed. But we discussed it with him, and he's someone who very much connects his music to tradition. You wouldn't know it when you hear it always, but when you know it, then you do hear those connections, and I think it's really, a great way to combine old and new.
This is great to hear, because I do love Gesualdo. I even did an article, and I always talked about him. Of course, he's very famous for the murders that he committed.
That's right.
But his music is, for the time when it was composed, very at the end of the 16th century, early 17th century, harmonically. I actually hear some film music, and I know that this guy took this harmonic progression from Gesualdo. I actually exactly know what film I'm talking about. And like Moro Lasso, there's incredible harmonic progressions and surprises, and I always found it amazing. And there is one group, I will actually tell them, it's Marco Longini. His group, they do an amazing intonation, very slow interpretations, but harmonically, in this pure intonation, because it's just voice, incredible. I love it. I love Gesualdo. So it can work with the really nicely with the string quintet, of course.
Yeah, I think also we were very happy with this.
And you're going to be recording this next March.
It's a possible idea. We wouldn't then do the switching back and forth, but it depends on a lot of things. I don't know yet exactly how it's going to come out, but definitely the Brahms and hopefully the Dean and hopefully maybe also Gesualdo.
Well, talking about recordings, you recorded Bach solo suites for the cello, but on the viola.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing I heard when I heard about you. I heard the recordings. How long ago was these recordings, the viola, the suites?
The suites, that's already quite a while ago. I think it was in 98, something like that. And I grew up in a family where Bach was the greatest.
Member of the family.
Yeah, member of the family. There was a huge portrait by Hausmann that was hanging on the wall. And it's another long story. But anyway, my parents just adored Bach. And there was a tradition of doing St. Matthew Passion in the family at Easter. So I grew up with Bach and they listened to the Bach cantata every Sunday morning, which is on Bavarian radio. And heaven forbid if any of us would say something. Shh.
You didn't even talk when the radio was playing.
More important than going to the service to church or something. So it was kind of in my blood. And my father was a cellist, not professional, but at heart very much a cellist. And he loved the Bach suites. And I just at some point got the idea that I thought they would work beautifully on the viola, partially because number 6, of course, was written for the Pomposa, which was played da braccio.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I had a whole year of just playing Bach in preparation for this. I just played basically nothing else. And I tried tuning down and, lots of stylistic things as to how I would want to finally record it. It's kind of still only how it was then. I think I might do some things differently now, but I ended up playing at normal pitch and with my regular equipment. I didn't put special strings, and for a whole while I played a whole step lower, which you might find difficult, but I tried to do that.
I do play the Baroque violin, so I'm familiar. I was going to ask, because yes, you play with normal pitch, but 442 or something like that?
440, yeah.
440, okay. But with normal strings, not gut strings or the
Well, at that time they were gut strings, but wound gut strings.
Okay.
At that time they didn't have those, what I call plastic strings that we play now.
Actually, that has improved quite a bit now. You're right.
It has improved such a lot.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Because I remember in the early 90s playing, and then you had to take out your pair of scissors and then start shaving the strings because they started peeling off, bit and bit, and intonation was horrendous because strings would not stay in tune. Yeah. And I still do that, but the strings are actually much more reliable than how they were 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So I will never forget, I just have to tell you one little anecdote about this.
Please, yeah.
When they were still gut strings, we played with a quartet and we were on tour in Austria. I remember this so clearly, I'll never forget it. And we played 59-3. And 59-3, of course, has the third and fourth movements are connected, the minuet and the fugue. There's a fugue at the end.
Okay.
And the viola starts the fugue. It's a great fugue. And in the minuet, I broke my G string. As the strings tended to still break in concert, that still was a common experience. Nowadays, doesn't happen anymore, or very rarely, much more rarely anyway. So I had to put on a new string, and because they were gut strings, of course I could tune all I wanted. It was flat in no time. And there came the beginning of the fugue, and my G string was almost a half tone flat. no chance to tune. So I had to refinger everything to try to.
Wow!
Not many people noticed that things were seriously wrong, and this is the kind of thing you have nightmares about,
I know that exactly. When the strings go down, tuning goes down, then you have to push your fingers forward, but only for that string. So that means when you move to the other strings, you have to go back to where you would be normally.
It's definitely a pretty acrobatic test.
It is.
But anyway, I'm thinking of it because I'm convinced that Bach would have loved the progress that has been made with the equipment, with the materials. Because he was somebody, from all I know, who was always curious about new developments of instruments, of keyboards, of stringed instruments that were not so formed yet as they are now. There's a violin, a viola, and a cello, but there were tons of different stringed instruments at the time. And he himself, of course, transcribed a lot of his music for different instruments. Like if you just think of the fifth cello suite that he also wrote for lute in a different key because it suited the lute
instrument better. Yeah.
And so all of this gave me the courage to say he would have not objected to me playing them on the viola.
Modern viola. Oh, viola, I don't think he would at all.
You have no idea how many times people come and say, how dare you do that? These are cello pieces. It's, it's like
really?
You're stealing these. Yeah, no, people have
such fundamentalism.
Many people
really
don't have understanding for just saying, it works beautifully on the viola. And yes, you have to do a few transpositions, but then when you look at the number 4, for instance, he put like different octaves where he didn't need to. I mean, he skipped octaves where there would have been no need, but he decided to do it. So I don't think it's such a big deal. It's not like playing the Opus 69 Beethoven cello sonata on the viola where you can't really do the polyphonic correspondences between the two instruments. That, I think, ruins the piece. So
okay.
I did that once and then decided that
it didn't work.
That was disrespectful of the piece. But with the Bach suites, I think it works great.
I agree. I actually have a friend who recorded some of them on the double bass too. This is another good point. When people compose in the Baroque period, there was so much freedom for the performer. I mean, Bach was certainly the father Bach was one of the strictest because whatever ornamentation he wanted, he typically notated. But majority of Baroque composers just left the music almost partly complete and you had to fill in the gaps basically the way you liked. Yeah. So every performance was a new invention in many ways.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
There are certain stylistic things and I am very aware. For me, the more than the tuning, sound color, of course, the gut strings, but the bow makes a huge difference. When you use a modern bow, then you can do things like martele and staccato, which people didn't really do at that time with the modern understanding, or did not play anything so flat, straight, any kind of long sound. Those are the stylistic important things, but you can, of course, play the Bach. And I do agree that they actually would be like, wow, look at that, that actually sounds quite good. If you could do this convincingly, it doesn't matter what instrument you do it, because they did it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they were not nearly as sort of narrow-minded as in some ways we are these days. It's the same as what you said about ornamentation and improvisation. I think it's an art that's lost.
It is lost.
I mean, luckily I know a few musicians who haven't lost it, but it's really rather the exception than the rule, and you don't find many people anymore who improvise cadenzas and solo pieces, solo concertos and things like that. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful art. I actually always ask my students to write their own cadenzas, at least to write their own cadenzas.
That's great.
If not, improvise them in the concert.
No, I think it's for the culprit is the new, at least in the 20th century, the conservatory system. They put it, like in my education, they put it on us such a straight jacket that it was like a box that you could not think outside of it. You could not even express anything outside of it. It really was bad because even like people who wanted to play jazz, who had an interest, as what your friend, the dean, the composer, quit Berlin Phil and became an independent composer. I understand that because it's a calling. That's very important. What is your calling? This is a message to the students now, maybe, because it doesn't matter what orchestras never made me happy. I mean, I played with orchestras, but certainly never desired to have a full-time position in an orchestra. I did very early on, and I knew that it wasn't for me. Once that, it was 1990, I left the orchestra, and I've been happy. I love orchestral music, but as a full-time job, that's a very, very different animal, let's call it. Yeah. So I like to have my freedom in many ways. Like I play this, I play that. So it is important when students are choosing what to do with their careers, if they were going to play instruments, What kind of jobs are they imagining? That's very important.
That's true. I have a little bit of a hard time with this because having taught students for over 30 years, viola students, 95% of them, for them it's the best thing that can happen if they find a good job in an orchestra. And plus, I agree with you, it wasn't for me either. And yes, especially now living in Munich, I love, just did a couple of days ago, going to Isar Philharmonie and hearing the Munich Philharmonic. There's such a great orchestra, sounds so fantastic. And yes, I still wouldn't want to play there every day. But on the other hand, it's kind of hard to say that when you know that, at least in my case, you know, I was educating them to be orchestra players in the great majority of cases.
Mm-hmm.
And the story about a calling is, I agree with you, but we all have to eat. And ask people when they, or I used to, now I don't teach anymore, but, or not, I don't have my part-time students, I mean long-term students anymore. But I used to ask them, could you see yourself in the back of the Oldenburg Symphony Orchestra viola section? Do you think you would be happy there? If your answer is yes, then I'm happy to teach. And of course there has to be a plan B. There has to be a plan B. Like, what do you do if you don't get an orchestra job? Now, luckily, most of my students did get orchestra jobs or other, like, chamber music groups, this and that. But there has to be some kind of alternative, obviously. So I wouldn't make them think about what would they do if this plan A didn't work out. And I've had students, like one of my students became the principal in the Gewandhaus Orchestra in Leipzig. It was her first job. It's really amazing, and she's a fantastic violist, but she quit after 2 or 3 years because it just wasn't for her. So sometimes you only find out when you've actually tried it too. It's not so clear. For me, it wasn't so clear. I didn't rule out that I would ever be a member of an orchestra. It just somehow didn't. My life went in a different direction, so it never became an issue. But you know, it's difficult because as a viola teacher, you obviously you can't say orchestra playing is no good because
no, for everybody, for anybody, basically, as you said, you know, even soloists have to do a combination of these jobs, like teach university jobs and play chamber music. But majority of instrumental musicians do have to get a job in an orchestra if they can.
That's right.
Even if it's not a full-time job, still play in orchestras, and if they're good enough and they're lucky enough, might play more chamber music and all that. But sometimes without trying, it doesn't become obvious. You don't see it. It's not so pronounced.
That's right.
I have 2 friends. They both studied violin at the same time with us. And one of them became a very famous composer, quit the violin. But these people, maybe they have these inclinations from the beginning. This was like very early with the keyboard, electric keyboards, and he had one and he was trying different things, sound effects, and he became a new age composer, but he also writes symphonies and all that. Another one even came to Germany, studied Baroque violin. Now he's an amazing bandoneon player. He records, I'm like, every time I listen to him, he's a great musician, but ended up staying as a musician, but not with the violin.
Right. Well, I think it's what, you know, how open-minded you are toward what your inclinations might be. For me, I always just wanted to play concerts when I grew up, and, you know, that was my goal. And then I took a teaching job, which was a little bit like, well, you didn't quite make it as living off the concerts alone. And of course it was a wonderful job because I have a C4 professorship at one of the few Musikhochschulen in Germany is a great privilege. But I was too young, too stupid to know that until I found out that teaching actually was a calling for me.
Okay.
Which is interesting because I had no idea, you know, until I started, and I did that because we wanted to have a family and we needed to have one of us have a fixed income, and we both were freelancing before, and so it just seemed a little too insecure, and so I took this job only to find out what a blessing it was. For me, it was one of the great things that happened in my life. It didn't keep me from playing concerts, but it also added something else that I didn't have before.
But there is the happiness that you've educated a whole bunch of violists who have careers now, And that's also a great accomplishment. It's like the CDs of your performance, but also these are the recordings of your teaching merits. Right?
Well, it's true, but I would say the most satisfying thing about teaching is to see young people make the most of their gifts and to grow and to blossom and to help them make the most of their gifts. That's an incredible joy that cannot be surpassed by any outward success of having found a job, which of course is great too, but it's this sense of coming into their own, being able to solve their own problems, become their own best teachers. That's incredible. That's the most satisfying that I found. And the relationship with it's like my second family. I have this huge family of students that are living far and near and far, and I have contact with almost all of them. And yeah, like the other night, 3 of them are playing the Munich Philharmonic now, and it's nice to go there and listen to them. Yeah.
Hey, I need tickets.
They actually even offer them. They're so sweet. But it's just, yeah, that's the great gift of it, I think. And then it's just like with other things. I discovered something about that I had as some kind of a gift that I didn't know about before, My curiosity about teaching and developing my own philosophy about it and approaching every student differently as to what they seem to need, to develop channels of how can I communicate best with this person. And it would be very different at times, extremely different. Some I would reach this way, others another way. Yeah, it was just always like a very adventurous journey with lots of incredible discoveries, wonderful discoveries for the most part.
Wonderful. Barbara, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for the drinks, and I had a great time. Thank you. And I'm sure people will like it because we talked about your career, but also it gave us an opportunity to talk about the backstage, what happens behind the scenes kind of thing. And that was great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining me today at another Open Windows podcast of Hit the Road Cultural Journeys. Until next time, all the best.